This is Susan Henderson. I think we should get started because we have one short hour with Heather Calomese and Stacey Wedin. So welcome to Following the Funding for 2021 to 22, diving into California's special education funding with Heather and Stacey from the California Department of Education. I just wanted to say welcome from all of the California Parent Training and Information Centers who are sponsoring this presentation today. It's the map on the screen, which I know is small, shows the different PTIs for California. There's Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, my organization. We roughly serve the San Francisco East Bay and counties to the north. Exceptional Parents Unlimited serves counties in the Central Valley and around there. Matrix Parent Network and Resource Center serves the San Francisco North Bay and beyond. Parents Helping Parents serves counties in the San Francisco South Bay down to Monterey. Support for Families of Children with Disabilities serves San Francisco. And Team of Advocates for Special Kids serves San Diego and Los Angeles counties, along with other Southern California counties. And now, for the reason you're here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Stacey go ahead and share hers. And then I want to introduce you to our two speakers. They are Heather Calomese, who is the Director of Special Education at the California Department of Education. I think, Heather, you started in this position or were appointed last August. So you've been,
almost.
Yeah.
Almost. We're coming upon a year. Yeah.
Yeah. So happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Heather has worked in education for 2 decades. Early on, she taught English and special education, starting in Iowa City, and then became a special education middle and high school teacher in moving to Chicago, where she also then was an administrator. And before coming to CDE, before we were lucky enough to get her, she was the executive director of special education for the Illinois State Board of Education. Stacey Wedin is the education administrator over statewide policy and implementation in the special education division, and advises on a number of complex statewide education matters, leading policy work related to kids with disabilities. She has a master's degree in social work and has used it to support children throughout her career, especially with issues of mental health and wellness. She's been at CD for 11 years, focusing on special education. So Stacey and Heather, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here and to see the just wonderful participation and hellos in the chats from around the state. And so Stacey and I are thrilled at the opportunity to join you guys for a little bit this afternoon to just give a walkthrough of the sort of the 2021 budget as it relates to special education funding. And, we are really excited that the I think focus and investments on special education, continues, and that allows for additional sort of development of programs and initiatives that will, and certainly are designed to support students with disabilities across the state as well. So again, we're happy to be here. Hopefully, you all have had a wonderful summer. We are heading into what is shaping up to be quite the fall, given sort of our current context and where we sit. And so, it dawned on me the other day that it really is almost upon a year that I've been in this role, and, really want to It's been, I think, one of the fastest years of my life, and it's sometimes one of the slowest years of my life as well. But I'm thrilled to be with CDE alongside Stacey as well, in providing guidance and direction to the state. It's critical that now more than ever that we continue to collaborate and support one another as a community. As we know, again, like I said, there are many sort of unknowns as we head into the fall. But I, over the past year, have just had the wonderful opportunity to meet and engage with many of you, and along with those from our school community, and know that we have a very tight knit, strong community that is committed to not only supporting students, families, and communities, but also supporting each other as well. So as we head into this year, just know that we are here to support you. Partner with you and collaborate with you as well. So without further ado, we'll jump right in. And Stacey, you can head to the next slide. That's us. And so you can go to the next one as well. So just in general, the 2021 Budget Act, Governor Newsom signed the Budget Act on July 12th of 2021. That's known as SB 129, and that's as part of the Budget Act as well. Then on July 9th of 2021, the Assembly Bill AB 130, which is the omnibus trailer bill, was signed into law as well. And so, as I stated before, the budget, which Stacey and I will go through and highlight some of the investments and sort of what that means, again, is really showing, I think, a really strong commitment to supporting our students and our families across the state. So once again, we're really excited to see, again, the focus and the spotlight on special education. Go to the next slide. So there are some just technical changes, and walk through those just a little bit as well. But just in terms of some of the formulas, and changes that came along with the budget this year, is that it's a little over $300 million increase to the statewide base rate for special education funding, and then the additional technical adjustments is really looking at out-of-home care funding formula, and as stated before, and on the slide, this is funding that goes directly to SELPAs to pay for students that are in sort of short-term residential therapeutic programs, right? And so the changes really are into the formula are really to accurately reflect where sort of foster youth are located and conform to state sort of child welfare system changes, and changes implemented through the continuum of care reform as well. So that's just a technical change as well. And then so I'm going to pause because I'm racing through, so I'm super excited. So at this point, Stacey and I are now going to walk through what I consider, I think, the meat of really the budget, and do some highlighting on, some of the funds, and sort of what they're intended for as well. So the first one is the Supportive Inclusive Practices Project, and in an expansion. So many of you know, or have heard of supporting inclusive practices, otherwise known as SIP, and they have been longtime state partners to the California Department of Education. Their role is really just that, in terms of really promoting and assisting grantees. I believe they have over 50 across the state of California, to really look at and dive into conversations related to culture, policy, practice, and cohesive leadership in terms of how to work with LEAs in terms of increasing, their inclusion rates across LEAs as well. And so, a fun statistic that that you'll stumble upon if you visit their website is that, over the past 3 years, SIP grantees were able to increase their inclusion rates 5%. And non-grantees over the 3 years increased 2%. So SIP is really committed to working very closely, shifting mindsets, shifting policies, shifting practices, in LEAs to promote inclusion as well, and that includes looking at some of our our early childhood efforts on up through high school as well. So specific to this expansion project, there's an additional 15 million in funds that are allocated to SIP. And so again, the purpose of that is to really, I think, scale up the efforts of SIP and sort of widen their impact and reach, so that additional grantees can have access to their technical assistance to ensure that students are in their least restrictive environments and really supporting LEAs along the way to get there as well. So again, we're really excited to have that project expand, from 50 on up to greater numbers, to again, widen the impact, increase accessibility for LEAs to engage in a process of looking at their environment and expanding on inclusive practices as well, which many of is not merely just sort of shifting kids, LRE or students LRE. An inclusivity, as I say, is oftentimes a mindset, and also enactment of policies and beliefs as well. And so SIP really looks at, I think, the entire picture as well. And so, and Laura, yep, give a shout out as well, to SIP in the comments. But, again, we really are excited about that project and know that it really does take intensive work at the LEA level to increase those practices. So I will now pass the baton to Stacey, who will continue with some of our other investments.
Thank you, Heather. So it's so nice to be here this afternoon with everybody, and kind of exciting that there's so much to talk about that it took both of us being here to cover all of it. And so just so you don't hear one person talking too long, we're going to kind of ping pong back and forth like this. So I'm going to advance. Oh, no, that didn't work. I'm going to advance the slide. There we go. I'm going to talk a little bit about our special education early intervention preschool grant proposal. And so this was sort of resurrected. This funding was initially provided in 2019. And then in 2020, mostly due to the budget crisis that was created by the pandemic, we saw this funding go away. Now it is back, thankfully so. And the amount is $260 million this year for the special education early intervention preschool grant. And the overall purpose of this funding is on the slide. And it's to provide services and supports in inclusive settings that have been determined to improve school readiness and long-term outcomes for infants, toddlers, and preschool pupils birth to 5 years of age. So that's a pretty big umbrella, and a lot can fall under that. Back to Heather talking about the supporting inclusive practices project expansion, you're going to see this theme carry through a lot of these new budget proposals, where there really is an acknowledgement of the importance of inclusive practices, not only for our students with disabilities, but for all students. And so you see it here too. If we're going to do that, we need to start early, right? We need to set students on the right trajectory, on the right path. And so this money is, for our early learners, our little learners. And the authorizing statute, the law, goes into allowable uses of these funds. So that's going to be the next slide. And I'll run through a few of them. There's more than this in the authorizing statute. What that means is that districts, this money goes directly to school districts. I should have said that in the beginning, versus going to SELPAs first, which is sort of the flow that a lot of our funding follows. This money is going to be provided directly to school districts. And they have a level of creativity and flexibility provided with this funding, which is really exciting. So examples of services and supports that can be used or can be provided with this funding: early intervention services, wraparound services. And so for anybody who's not familiar with that term, wraparound, it's really just an integrated services and supports for students and families. So not just looking at a student's academic needs, but also looking at their health needs, their resource needs, really what it sounds like, wrapping around the student and family and supporting them with what they need. Expansion of inclusive practices, again, to ensure that preschool children with disabilities have access to learn in the least restrictive environment. So what we know is that, many districts will build out programming based on the funding that's received, right? So in this case, this funding is flexible enough so that they can really look at building out more inclusive programming, because we know that many of our preschool children with IEPs specifically are served in separate settings. So this is kind of, pushing the narrative of really building out inclusive settings. Professional development for preschool teachers to build capacity around serving children with disabilities in more inclusive settings. So again, kind of back to what Heather was saying, a critical component to making sure that our schools are equipped to build this out is making sure that our teachers are prepared so that they really feel ready to accept and address the needs of the spectrum of diverse learners that walk through the door into their classroom. And so districts can use this funding to provide some professional development around that. So this is, it's really exciting and really important. We know the benefits of early intervention. The other thing that I will note with this funding is that the provisions in law allow this funding to serve students who don't necessarily have an IEP, an individualized education program, or an IFSP, individual family services plan. So that's pretty critical, because as we know, sometimes with our early learners, it's very hard to differentiate. Sometimes they have needs that may not rise to the threshold of eligibility for a particular entitlement, but nonetheless, would they benefit from some additional support? I think oftentimes the answer is yes. And so there is that flexibility provided with this funding as well this year. So very exciting. And I'm going to kick it back over to Heather and advance the slide.
All right, thank you, Stacey. So the next sort of budget investment, if you will, is what we call the special education dispute prevention and alternative dispute resolution, right, or otherwise known as another acronym as ADR. And really, the overall intent and purpose of alternative dispute resolution is really just that, is providing an avenue towards resolving differences of opinion, that involves a collaborative effort of the IEP team to collectively address issues and concerns that arise at a local level, right? So that there are other options in the continuum of, rather than saying, well, I, want to go file a state complaint, or I want to pursue due process. Alternative dispute resolution is part of the continuum to also, I think, support and acknowledge that differences do happen, right? Many of those, and those of us who've been in IEP meetings know that that's just a fact of life, but that, that doesn't have to leave, relationships ruined and parents feeling left out of the process. And so ADR is really meant to help support and really proactively, I think, resolve and collectively, like I said, address the issues as well for students that might arise. So the Budget Act provides again a $100 million, and again this money will be allocated directly to the special education local plan areas, or SOPAs, to help their member LEAs conduct dispute resolution, and any sort of voluntarily alternative dispute resolution activities, right? And so, this, again, is something that, uh, the SELPAs must submit a plan to CDE to really talk about how that support and what that support will look like. As there are places across our state that look very, very differently. We want to be able to acknowledge that as well, and that the work can be done in many different ways across the board. And so, I think, that the SELPA in and of itself must, again, work off of that plan, decide what's appropriate, given their current situation. But again, that's again, quite a bit of money to really, I think, invest in and support what I think is an ADR, alternative dispute resolution program that our folks in the field have experienced quite a bit of success with, and so we're really looking forward to dialoguing further about the efforts and looking at some of the success stories across the state as well in terms of ADR. So wanted to go to the next slide. Right. So these funds what can they be used for, right? And so this slide here really just highlights some of the ways in which these funds can be used, right? So again, early intervention in this sense means being proactive, right? And so that's looking at proactive communication. And sort of parent support activities, which again can look very differently depending upon what the desire is in terms of how best to support parents and actually what the need is. So there's room for I think some tailored support there, and then also, conducting these, voluntary, right, ADR activities, right? Again, alternative dispute resolution is voluntary, and I do want to, emphasize that at this point in time. And so, but really, again, conducting those activities in and of itself that, cannot be resolved through the IEP process, but, really looking at ways in which, IEP teams can collectively work together to solve problems. Another piece of the funding, which I also think is very exciting, is again working in partnerships with our FECs and other family support or organizations as well, as that's also, I think, a critical link, and I think a really an investment that, obviously, in terms of that partnership, can only strengthen the process as well. And then also, again, last bullet point here in terms of really developing and implementing those plans. And again, that could include outreach. That could include, I think, also reaching families who a primary language might not be English. And so really looking at how do we address, the language needs of our families and other challenges that can arise as a part of the IEP process as well. So that is ADR, and I will pass it back to Stacey.
Okay, thank you. So the next proposal, this is kind of brand new funding and a brand new proposal that's pretty exciting. And we put these two together right after ADR. We're talking about individualized education program facilitation. And so there was money. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the budget item is, and then I'll talk more broadly about IEP facilitation. So what the budget did was it provided $300,000 to the Department of Education to enter into a contract with an entity, either an institution of higher education, it's basically our universities, or non-governmental organization with expertise in IEP facilitation and ADR, to develop a model for IEP facilitation sort of statewide. So right now, California doesn't offer IEP facilitation services on a statewide basis. I think that there are areas that have, regions that have developed IEP facilitation services or offer IEP facilitation services. as part of their ADR continuum, but it's not accessible for all, and it is kind of dependent on where you are in the state as to whether or not you might have access to IEP facilitation services. So this contract and this entity that receives the contract will spend some time looking at implementing a statewide model for IEP facilitation. So I'm going to move to the next slide. That is so a little bit, just more generally speaking, in case there are folks here that aren't familiar with IEP facilitation, it is kind of what it sounds like, and it's essentially a trained, skilled facilitator coming to the IEPT meeting and making sure that that the communication is happening, and that as much as possible, everyone's needs are being met. So as we know, as a mom who has a son with a disability, I know going to IEPT meetings, sometimes somebody at the table either doesn't feel like their message is getting across, or maybe there's just a lapse in the information that the parent wants to discuss versus the LEA. And so, you know, all of these things happen, and the IEP team meeting is so critical, right, to making sure that everybody has the same goal, that everyone's on target, that the student is the focus. And so the facilitator comes in to make sure that that's happening as sort of a neutral party. And so we have other states that offer this on a statewide basis. And it's highly sort of regarded and understood to be an effective practice with some pretty good outcomes. And again, it's all in the vein of being proactive and addressing any potential disagreements proactively, rather than waiting until there's a series of frustrating meetings and it sort of, you know, goes sideways from there. That's not what anybody wants. On or before, with this particular budget proposal, on or before July 1, 2023, the contractor, the selected contractor, will sort of deliver a report to the state with some specifics around the model that they've developed, and along with some recommendations on how we sort of implement and scale up. So in 2023, once we have all of that information, that's when we start sort of the implementation conversation, obviously contingent on future resources and, you know, whatever it might look like in a couple of years. But this is really exciting. And as you know, I know that most, if not all, you know, on this call are parents. And so this is, when we're talking about statewide budget items, sometimes it's really hard to understand, how is this going to impact me as a parent? How is this going to impact my student? How am I going to see the return on this investment? And in this case, with an IEP facilitation network in the state, this is something that could really benefit everyone on a very individual basis. I think that ideally we would have some sort of situation where if anybody who wanted an IEP facilitator to attend the IEPT meeting could have that and have access to that. So this is a pretty exciting exploratory sort of exercise here. And I will kick it back to Heather.
Thanks, Stacey. And I wanted to just, I think, you know, talk a little bit about the IEP facilitation. I think to underscore the excitement behind something like a network being established in the state of California. I came from the state of Illinois, which had a full IEP facilitation network. And so, you know, I did see a comment come through in the chat in terms of the ability for parents and all parties to have a neutral facilitator. And so, you know, and again, not, you know, again, this is an exploratory work in terms of what it would look like in California, but at least in the state of Illinois, you know, we, you know, worked with independent trained facilitators. And so, you know, we would, you know, see Illinois State Board of Education staff would work with LEAs and other entities across the state and our facilitators and assign them out. And that was a service that was available to any family across the state as well. And so, you know, it really, you know, I couldn't, you know, folks couldn't rave enough about the impact that the facilitators had. I mean, they really were, you know, someone that came in and could could really help IEP teams navigate some pretty difficult situations. So again, we are super excited to begin exploring some of this work, and so currently right now, and with many of these sort of budgetary items is that you see before you, this one in and of itself is a competitive process. So, we will be, seeking entities through an application process along with some of these other projects, very, very soon, this early fall, and so that the work can begin as soon as possible as well. So I will stop my plug for IEP facilitation, but I did want to say that Illinois had quite a successful program. And Illinois was a state that served, I think, it was considered one of the 7 largest states in terms of serving students with disabilities. Obviously not as much as California, but still, I think a really a pretty good amount, and with a really good successful program. So the next item in the Budget Act is providing 10 million in one-time funds, right, to provide technical assistance and support to local education agencies for, first and foremost, developing comprehensive IEPs and developing the tools and any resources to assess the needs of learning loss that potentially could have happened during the COVID-19 sort of disruptions. And so, for us, that money is going directly to LEAs, and so technical assistance, would include, CDE, us, will be providing guidance to LEAs across the state to help, I think, really sort of look at, what are the ways in which, we can continue to provide, I think, guidance and support in relation to developing comprehensive IEPs. I think also, some of the efforts will also be providing guidance to also resolving compliance issues, and then also addressing late IEPs and late evaluations for eligibility as well. So again, those, again, it fairly varies in terms of, the use of the funds, in terms of how an LEA might use those. But typically, obviously, it's intended to address the learning and the service needs as a result of COVID. And there's quite a bit of, I think, creative control in terms of what that might look like given the needs of the LEA. And I think that's one of the beauty of the funds in some ways. And so I know that there are many places across the state that are intending to do and implement some creative programming to address needs for their students as well. You can head to the next slide. And so again, here is the money is to provide support to LEAs to identify and assess those students with disabilities, and also utilizing local assessments and other measures for making those determinations, and providing providing support to LEAs in developing comprehensive IEPs as well. And so I think this budgetary item also supports the work of our monitoring units as well as as we move into the fall. Our monitoring is which we're having to come to the realization that we're still going to have to do a lot of things virtually. right, and in a virtual environment for our monitoring teams. And so for us, really, focusing in on first and foremost, supporting LEAs across the state, students and families, to ensure that students are supported as they return back to school. So planning for, helping folks really think through what does positive behavior supports look like as students return to a school environment. Because, for me, first and foremost, the social emotional health of students, in particular students with disabilities, is number one, as they return back from a traumatic event such as the pandemic has been, quite frankly, for all of us. And so, I think that's one sort of one way and avenue that our monitoring will, I think, also help support some of this work, and really help LEAs sort of think through what can be and how can they tackle some of the issues, very real issues about having addressing late IEPs and addressing late assessments as well. And so part of our monitoring will be focusing and helping support and providing oversight, of course, in terms of our general supervision requirements, in terms of really ensuring that late IEPs and late assessments are addressed in a timely fashion as well. And the next slide. And so the next one, Budget Act, includes roughly actually a flat amount of $450 million to, again, on a one-time basis, for SELPAs and their member LEAs to provide learning recovery support. And so again, looking at the impacts of COVID on students with disabilities. And again, similar to ADR, that there will be a plan that must be submitted to CDE, detailing how the LEAs will be implementing the requirements of this funding. And so you can actually head to the next slide. And so again, we'll be looking at those plans. And again, it's another way for us to engage and support the process in terms of, what does learning recovery look like for LEAs across the state. But in terms of really looking at, in terms of what are those funds, what's required in terms of those funds is really sort of laid out in the slide before you, in terms of that, obviously the money has to be used related to learning recovery and addressing the school disruptions between March of 2020 to September of 2021. And again, the funds, again, received in these cannot, in terms of, you can't use the funds, I'm sorry, to match expenditures for, or attorney's fees and things like that. So ensuring that the money goes directly to, the students is really the goal here. Again, there's a term called supplement, not supplant. And so, outside of other expenditures or spending at an LEA, this funding, again, is really used to supplement sort of the additional, the sort of current funding that LEAs already receive, but this is additional on top of that as well. And then I will pass it along to Stacey for the next item.
Yeah, so one of the things that I really appreciate about all of these various budget proposals is that you're seeing investments in, from a policy perspective, you're seeing investments in such critical areas, and it's sort of, they run a spectrum, right? And so here we see a budget item where $500,000 was provided to study non-public school / agency placements. So this is another area worthy of examination and investment. So what's going to happen with that $500,000 is CDE will again contract with an entity through a competitive process to conduct a pretty sweeping examination of non-public schools and a lot of different areas associated with that. And those are on the slide. So I'll talk through those. For anybody who's not familiar, our non-public schools serve students with disabilities that have, generally speaking, have some complex needs. So if you have a student and the IEP team determines that that student cannot be adequately served at their sort of neighborhood school, they need more specialized support. Sometimes the IEP team will determine that maybe it would be better if this student was served by a non-public school that's able to sort of specialize in supporting students with complex needs. And they'll contract with a non-public school to do that. So that's a little bit of context. So this particular study will examine various areas. First is how California compares to other states in serving students with complex support needs. So how are we doing as a state when we get these students that arrive at our schools? The study will seek to analyze relevant data on student placements. So kind of getting a grasp on the universe. So how many California students are served in these types of settings versus nationally. So that type of examination of the data will take place. The study will evaluate the process used by IEP teams in determining appropriate placements. So that's a really interesting component to this proposal and to the eventual study. Necessarily so, placement decisions are made by the IEP team in discussing what that particular student needs at that moment in time. And so it's hard to, I guess it'll be interesting to see how the study will, put their arms around, are there trends, are there themes, are there certain things that are always discussed when an IEP team is deciding that a student needs a non-public school placement. So that will be really interesting information, I think, to get on a more sort of holistic level. And then the next slide, let's see. Okay, there we go. So going on, again, I said this study was sweeping, so there's a lot that they want to look at. It will analyze student outcomes in NPSA placement. So are the students, when they're placed in these settings, are they improving on various measures? Are they thriving? It will evaluate the certification process and related oversight activities. So we at the Department of Education, we have a certification process for non-public schools, both in-state and out-of-state. That certification process is pretty well outlined in existing statute as far as what we look at and how we determine whether or not we will issue a certification to a particular setting. So this study will evaluate that process and look at the types of information that we review in that determination. And the study will also analyze ways to improve interagency coordination between the Department of Education and the State Department of Social Services in certifying and monitoring both the educational and residential components of non-public schools and agencies. So as you may or may not know, many non-public schools, a good number, are affiliated somehow with a residential type of component. In state, those are our STRTPs, short-term therapeutic programs, residential programs, STRTPs. That one always trips me up. It used to be what used to be called kind of group homes, right? And so in a lot of ways, in a lot of settings, the residential component and the educational component are affiliated and somehow attached. The Department of Education looks at the non-public school piece. The Department of Social Services, generally speaking, is the lead agency in the state when you're talking about certifying residential programs, what used to be called group homes, now STRTPs. So the study will look at ways to make sure that, jointly, we're doing everything that we can to make sure that the settings that serve California students are safe and a place where they can go and learn and thrive like we want them to. So a final report from this study will be due to the legislature, State Board of Education, and Department of Finance by October 1, 2023. So again, it's a couple years out. We first need to establish the contract, and then the study will go, be underway. And then we'll get that report in 2023. And it should have a lot of interesting information, and then we'll go from there. And so I think with that, I'll kick it back over to Heather.
All right. So the last one, and that we'll cover today, and I think really centers our family empowerment centers across the state. And so I think it's, for us, super exciting to build upon, I think, the great work that's being done across the state with our family empowerment centers and partners, is really to, the Budget Act provides an additional $7 million to support and expand FACs across the state. And so really what that means is that by March of 2022, we are required to establish new FECs in the state, that are established under Early Start Family Resource Centers that do not have an FEC. So, really sort of targeting what, we might call, or sometimes I call, sort of deserts, areas that sort of lack, resources for families to access as well. And so, I think within that as well, the priority in terms of must be given in terms of applicants that can ensure the continuity of support for the transition from Part C services, so an ISFP, to Part B, which is an IEP of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so, we know that the transition from Part C to Part B services is absolutely critical for ensuring that our students with disabilities have, number one, and their families, number one, are fully equipped and informed to know, what what do Part B services entail, right? Because there are some differences in terms of Part C and Part B. And so what does that mean for, in terms of what do supports and services look like for our youngest learners? And so we know that many parents, the process oftentimes is scary. Oftentimes, for various reasons, sometimes out of our control, are confusing, and so it's a big deal, particularly that transition, and for me, really considered foundational in terms of a student's development and growth. And so, really making sure that again, that the focus is really on that C to B transition. As I said before, it really is critical, and oftentimes can set the trajectory of a student's growth over time throughout their educational career. So again, I'm happy that they have that focus. And then also, you can head to the next slide. The grant applicant, just to, I think, throw a little bit more information in there prior to, before I jump into the next slide. But in terms of the application process, there has to be a demonstrated ability to coordinate services with existing family support organizations. So, within that region, including the Early Start Family Resource Centers and other organizations that provide students or provide support for parents of children with disabilities. And so, really, I think that is critical for us, that there's that sort of ability and expertise in some of those areas, so that we are continuing to build and build out strong supports for our families across California. So, there are a number of requirements, on sort of the CDE side, in terms of, really, with this money, how do we then sort of coordinate and track data, right? And so the Budget Act specifically earmarks money of that $7 million for that purpose. And so, we will be establishing sort of an outcome-based evaluation process and procedure that FECs can use, so that they can, meet the requirements of the Ed Code. And then, we are then required to assess eligibility for funding on a cyclical basis, also, according to Ed Code as well. And so again, you can head to the next slide, Stacey. Sorry, I skipped a slide ahead. Mine. Yep. And so how can families, yeah, I think get involved, and I think there are a number of ways in terms of how families can get involved. And, first and foremost, we have, or you have access to your LEA, and really asking about, engagement opportunities for parents and for families, especially, as LEAs are reaching out to families to welcome them back to school campuses this year. Again, reaching out to your respective SELPA and your Community Advisory Committee, or CAC, as we call them as well, are also great avenues to get involved in the in terms of what's happening, what's going on. CACs hold meetings. And so really valuable, support and resources for our families across the state as well. And so a lot of good work being done with our CACs as well. And again, there is, the what we call the local control accountability plan, or the expanded learning opportunities grant plan. If your LEA, receive that, to inquire about the parent involvement component, right? In terms of, how are parents being engaged into the accountability plan, being informed of the accountability plan as well, and having access to that. And then also, first and foremost as well, your nearest FEC is also just a fantastic resource for learning about, other opportunities across larger regions or counties to become involved and engaged in some of the conversations as well. I did also want to plug, the work of our we have a new office, or a division, I should say, in the California Department of Education, and that's our family engagement, division. I've had the opportunity to co-present with the director of the division, Lisa Borrego, and so she and I co-presented last time on some of the supports and services that she has planned across the state to engage parent and family from a state level CDE perspective. And so she and I will be dialoguing, really soon to talk about additional ways we can continue to raise up and elevate students with disabilities, across the special education division, but also with the family engagement division as well. And so, be on the lookout for, I don't know, sort of what we're going to plan, but in terms of just really sort of recognizing that there's a natural intersection between our two divisions as well. Another sort of, activity here is that the multilingual support division has a new director. She just started last week, I believe. So, I'm really excited, and we're really we're really excited and looking forward to working with her. As well, because one of the priority areas of mine is to really lift up and elevate the conversation of English learners that also have been identified as a student with disabilities, as that is a rather large student population group within our special education community, and many of you know that there was the roadmap in terms of, I think it was published in 2019, I believe, in terms of, how do we best support our English learners that have also been identified as having a disability. And so, really building upon that work as well will be a focus of ours, along with utilizing the supports and services of our Imperial County SELPA. Contently, they are part of our statewide system of support, and they provide really, I think, critical supports and services to our, to our entities across the state in terms of supporting again, English learners with disabilities. And so we're really working very closely with them and also with MSD to really, talk about how do we build and expand upon the roadmap, but how do we meet the needs of English learners with disabilities as they return to school as well. So lots of, I think, really exciting work ahead of us. As you can see, it's a lot of work ahead of us, and I think, we're really looking forward to engaging and dialoguing with many of you across the state that are already implementing some of the work, that are engaged in the work, because we do know that the work is, it's important for us at CDE to remain engaged, with the field, to one, learn of sort of the lived experiences, and then two, dialogue about ways in which we can continue to improve our systems and our support. And so that for me and for us is, I think, extremely critical, like I said, now more than ever, especially given the fall. And so, we will always look forward to opportunities to directly engage with folks across the state. So, I think with that, that concludes our presentation, and really wanted to just thank all of you for attending, and really want to make sure that, please reach out. We have a community that will help support and assist you. So, again, thank you so much, and hopefully you have a smooth start to the school year. And also just wanted to make sure that all of you, please be safe and healthy as well.
Thank you so much. This is Susan, everybody. Thank you so much, Heather and Stacey, for the really comprehensive presentation. We're out of time, and we have way too many questions to answer. I wrote in the chat that we will send out a question and answer document to everybody who registered. So we'll contact you about helping us answer some of the questions that came in. And maybe, just maybe, we can have you back to do a live session of questions. Not to put you on the spot, but
yeah, no, and that would be great. I also think, because I did see a lot of the questions, and a lot of really good questions and conversation come through in the chat. And so, and we're happy to, take a look at those questions and, respond back if we can, and if appropriate, so that you can pass along as well.
That's great. And just to let everybody who's here, thank you for joining us. Definitely reach out to your parent training and information centers and FECs for opportunities to get involved. We will also, I think the PTIs, no matter what, will get together again and have another session on new legislation and how parents can get involved. And I'm sorry we ran out of time, but I'm not sorry in a sense, because there was so much information to share. So thank you, everyone. Watch your emails and social media for the link to the recorded video, the question and answers, and for our next event. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.